She could have saved her father's life with that money. No one would have known. But when Grace stood before her billionaire boss the next morning, what she chose to do changed not just her future, but his faith in humanity forever. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I have missed you all. Missed all the experiences we've had together. It's been a rough ride as we're currently battling some technical issues, but trust me, we're getting everything back and running. So stick around. I need your support on YouTube now more than ever. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. Now let's begin. The night had been long. The city outside shimmered under 1,000 artificial lights, each one flickering like the last fragile hope of the desperate. Inside the towering glass building of Locke Industries, the fluorescent bulbs hummed a tired song, and the rhythmic clatter of keyboards was the only sign that a few souls were still clinging to their deadlines. Grace Thompson sat at her desk, her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. It was almost 9:47 p.m., long past office hours, yet she stayed as she always did. To most, she was invisible. Just another face in accounting, one of the many workers grinding quietly to survive. But tonight she wasn't alone. Behind a slightly ajar office door, Jonathan Locke, the billionaire CEO, watched her in silence. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but when he'd stepped out to take a late call, he'd heard her voice trembling on the other side of the thin wall. "Mom, did the money I sent cover Dad's treatment?" Grace's voice had cracked with worry. "No." "Then I'll take more shifts. Just don't let him miss a session, okay? I'll find a way. I promise." Jonathan froze. The line went quiet, but not peacefully so. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, like the pause before someone breaks. He watched her brush away a tear, straighten her posture, and resume typing. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, as if every keystroke carried a piece of her soul. He leaned back against his doorframe. "She's still working, even now." Ryan, his assistant, approached from behind. "Sir, are you still here? It's almost 10. Jonathan didn't turn around. "Do you know that woman?" Ryan followed his gaze. "Grace Thompson?" "Yeah. Works in accounts. Single, I think. Good worker. Quiet. Keeps to herself." Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Quiet doesn't mean unimportant." Ryan smirked. "You're not planning to promote her, are you?" Well, she's decent. But nothing extraordinary." Jonathan ignored the comment. He was thinking of something else, a memory his late father once told him. "You'll know a person's worth not by what they say when you're watching, but by what they do when you're not." An idea formed, one that was both a test and, perhaps, a way to understand what kind of people still existed in his company. "Ryan," he said quietly, "add an extra $500 to her paycheck tomorrow." Ryan blinked. "Wait, what? 500? For what reason?" "No reason," Jonathan replied. "Just make it look like a mistake." Ryan raised a brow, clearly intrigued. "And what exactly are we testing?" Jonathan turned to face him fully now, his tone calm but decisive. "Her integrity." Ryan let out a low whistle. "Sir, forgive me, but you really think she'll give it back? I heard her phone call. Her dad's sick. She's broke. She'll keep it." Jonathan's expression remained unreadable. "If she returns it," he said slowly, "I'll pay for her father's treatment in full. But if she doesn't..." Ryan finished the sentence for him. "You'll let her go." Jonathan didn't answer. But his silence was enough. The next afternoon, Jonathan stepped out of his office and walked through the accounting floor, his presence commanding instant stillness. Every keyboard stopped. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Grace looked up, startled. The CEO rarely visited this floor. "Miss Thompson," he said with a faint, polite smile, "you've been doing excellent work lately. I wanted to personally hand you your paycheck." Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, thank you, Mr. Locke." She accepted the white envelope with both hands, grateful and flustered. "God bless you, sir." Jonathan nodded and walked away, but his eyes lingered just long enough to see her tuck the envelope carefully into her worn brown handbag without counting it. He respected that. That evening, when most employees had gone home, he lingered again, standing by the glass railing that overlooked the cafeteria. Down below, Grace sat alone at a small table, the faint hum of vending machines filling the quiet. She pulled out the envelope and began counting. Her fingers slowed, then stopped. Her lips moved silently, recounting. Once, twice, a third time. Her brows knit together. "This can't be right," she whispered. Jonathan could read her body language even from afar. Confusion, hesitation, fear. She leaned back in her chair and whispered softly, "This could help Dad, but what if it's a mistake?" Her hand went to her chest, and she bowed her head, closing her eyes. "Lord, what should I do?" Jonathan's chest tightened. He had seen people steal before. He'd seen greed wear 1,000 disguises. But what he saw on Grace's face wasn't greed. It was anguish. It was the battle between love and integrity, a war only the purest hearts truly understand. He turned away, conflicted. For the first time, his own test didn't feel like a game. Grace didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window of her tiny apartment in Queens, her laptop open on the kitchen table, bills spread out before her like a battlefield. Her father's hospital statement glared at her. Outstanding balance, $3,450. The extra $500 could buy him another week. Maybe even more. But every time she thought of using it, she saw Jonathan's calm, kind face in her mind, and her mother's voice from childhood echoing softly, "Do right, even when it hurts." At dawn, she made a decision. By 8 a.m., Jonathan was already at his desk. Ryan strolled in holding 2 coffees. "Morning, boss. Ready to find out if your little experiment paid off?" Jonathan didn't answer, his eyes fixed on the glass door. Moments later, a soft knock came. "Come in," he said. Grace stepped inside, holding the envelope in both hands. Her posture was respectful, her voice calm but slightly shaky. "Good morning, Mr. Locke." Jonathan nodded. "Good morning, Miss Thompson. What brings you here?" She took a slow breath. I think there's been a mistake with my paycheck, sir." Ryan's eyebrows shot up. Jonathan kept his tone neutral. "A mistake?" "Yes," she said, extending the envelope toward him. "There's an extra $500. I wanted to return it before accounting processes next week's payroll." For a moment no one spoke. Ryan blinked. You didn't think maybe it was a bonus?" Grace smiled faintly. "If it were, I'm sure HR would have sent an email. Besides, I don't believe in keeping what isn't mine." "I couldn't." Jonathan leaned back, studying her face. "Even if you needed the money?" Her voice faltered slightly. "Yes, sir. Even if it could help someone you love?" Grace's eyes dropped, her lips trembling. "Especially then," she whispered. "Because if I lose myself to desperation, what good would I be to the people I'm trying to save?" The room fell silent again. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that carried weight. Jonathan finally exhaled. He took the envelope from her and nodded. "Thank you, Grace. That will be all." She nodded politely and turned to leave, relief softening her expression. As soon as the door closed, Ryan turned to his boss, eyes wide. "She actually did it. I can't believe it." Jonathan smiled faintly, a warmth flickering across his usually stoic face. "Believe it, Ryan. Because today, I just met someone extraordinary." Later that afternoon, Jonathan called HR. "Find out everything you can about Grace Thompson. Her background, her family, where she lives, everything." "Is she in trouble?" the HR manager asked cautiously. "No," Jonathan replied softly. "Quite the opposite." He hung up and sat back in his chair, staring out at the city skyline. His mind was no longer on profit margins or quarterly reports. It was on a woman who'd just reminded him that decency still existed in a world that rewarded corruption. And though he didn't know it yet, Grace's simple act of honesty would set off a chain of events that would transform both of their lives forever. The next morning, the office felt strangely different. The air was still the same, crisp with coffee and the faint hum of printers, but to Jonathan everything looked sharper, clearer, as though he was seeing his company through a new lens. Grace walked past his glass office door, her hair tied back neatly, a small smile on her lips as she greeted the receptionist. She didn't look like someone who had just returned $500 she desperately needed. She looked free. Jonathan watched her in silence for a while before turning to Ryan. "Has HR gotten back to you?" Ryan nodded, holding out a tablet. "Here. Grace Thompson, 28. Grew up in Queens. Graduated top of her class in accounting from CUNY. Single. Been taking care of her parents since her father got diagnosed with chronic kidney disease 3 years ago. Mother's unemployed. Works part-time sewing clothes from home. Rent's behind 2 months." Jonathan's jaw tightened. 2 months. "Yeah," Ryan continued. "Landlord's already sent a final notice. Looks like she's barely holding things together." Jonathan leaned back, his fingers tapping the desk lightly. "And yet she returned that money." Ryan gave a low whistle. "Most people wouldn't. Not in her situation." Jonathan smiled faintly. "That's what makes her remarkable." There was a pause. Ryan tilted his head, curious. "So, what now? Are you really going to pay for her father's treatment?" Jonathan's gaze drifted to the skyline beyond the glass. "I gave my word, didn't I?" Ryan hesitated. "Do you want me to tell her?" "No," Jonathan said firmly. "Not yet. I don't want gratitude. I want honesty, pure, uncoerced. She did the right thing without expecting anything in return. Let's keep it that way." He turned back to his computer. "Call St. Luke's Hospital. Tell them an anonymous donor will cover all medical expenses for a patient named Daniel Thompson." Ryan blinked. "You're serious?" Jonathan shot him a look. "Have you known me to joke about integrity?" Ryan held up his hands in surrender. "Right. Anonymous donor. Got it." That evening, Grace sat beside her father's hospital bed, the faint beep of the monitor filling the silence. Her father, once a tall, strong man with a laugh that filled rooms, now looked fragile, pale, yet somehow peaceful. "How was work today, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice soft. Grace smiled. "Good. Busy as always. Mr. Locke came down to my floor yesterday." Her father's eyebrows lifted slightly. "The boss himself? That's rare, isn't it?" Grace nodded. "He gave me my paycheck personally. I thought it was a mistake at first." Her father chuckled weakly. "You must be doing something right." She hesitated. "Well, there was a mistake. They gave me too much. $500 extra." He looked at her, concern flickering in his eyes. "And what did you do?" "I returned it," she said softly. For a moment, her father said nothing. Then a smile curved his lips. "That's my girl." She felt tears prick her eyes. "It could have covered your medication for another week, Dad. I almost." He reached out, his weak hand covering hers. "Grace, if you'd kept it, it would have been easier in the short run. But you'd have carried that guilt forever. Integrity doesn't feed us, but it keeps us human." She smiled through her tears. "You sound like Mom." He chuckled faintly. "We've been married 32 years. She's bound to have rubbed off on me." They sat in silence for a moment, their hands still intertwined. Then the nurse entered, holding a clipboard. "Good news," she said with a smile. "The billing department just called. Someone's taken care of your balance." Grace blinked. "What do you mean?" The nurse looked between them. "Your hospital bill, it's been fully paid. The account's clear." Grace froze. There must be a mistake." The nurse shook her head. "No mistake, Miss Thompson. It was an anonymous donor." Her father's mouth fell open slightly. "Anonymous." Grace's voice trembled. "Are you sure? Positive?" The nurse smiled warmly. "Looks like someone up there is watching out for you." When she left, Grace sank slowly into her chair, stunned. Her father squeezed her hand. "Grace, do you think it could be?" She shook her head quickly. "No, Dad. Mr. Locke doesn't even know about your condition. And I'd never ask for help like that. He smiled knowingly. Still, miracles happen, sweetheart. Sometimes people see goodness and want to return it. Grace looked away, her throat tight. Maybe, she whispered. The next morning, Jonathan arrived early. Before anyone else. He sat in the quiet of his office, sipping black coffee, watching the sunrise reflect off the glass towers of Manhattan. For once, the city didn't look like a battlefield of profit and loss. It looked alive. Real. He opened his laptop and pulled up the company's community fund records. For years, he had poured money into charities, foundations, relief programs. But all of it felt distant. Impersonal. Until now. For the first time, his wealth had done something that mattered to someone he could actually see. Ryan walked in a few minutes later, carrying a folder. The hospital confirmed payment. Everything went smoothly. Jonathan nodded. Good. Ryan smirked. So what's next? Gonna buy her a car. Jonathan gave him a look that made him immediately backtrack. Kidding. Just saying you're unusually invested. Jonathan leaned back, his tone quiet but firm. When you spend your life surrounded by people who smile to your face and lie behind your back, someone like Grace reminds you the world isn't entirely lost. Ryan frowned. You sound like you've been burned. Jonathan gave a humorless chuckle. Try trusting partners who steal your patents and friends who sell your secrets. You'll understand why I test people before I believe in them. Ryan's voice softened. And Grace passed. She did, Jonathan said quietly. And because she did, I think it's time she gets something more than a silent reward. 2 days later, Grace received an email marked urgent from the CEO's office. Her heart skipped as she opened it. From Office of the CEO. Subject: Transfer Notice. Miss Thompson. Effective immediately, you are being transferred to the Finance Strategy Division, reporting directly to the CEO's department. Please report to the 18th floor Monday morning at 9 a.m. Congratulations. Office of Jonathan Locke. Grace stared at the screen, her mouth falling open. The Finance Strategy Division was elite. The brain of the company. Only top-tier analysts worked there. And she'd just been invited in. When she arrived home that night, her mother was sewing at the kitchen table. Mom, Grace whispered, still holding her phone. They promoted me. Her mother looked up, eyes widening. What? Grace, that's wonderful. Grace laughed, still half in disbelief. I don't even know why. Maybe it's just good timing. Her mother smiled gently. Maybe it's faith paying off, baby. Grace hugged her tightly. But deep down she couldn't shake a strange feeling that someone somewhere had seen what she did and decided to reward her for it. Monday morning came fast. Grace stepped into the sleek marble lobby of the 18th floor, her nerves buzzing. Everything here felt different. Quieter, more intense. The desks were fewer, the people sharper, the atmosphere colder. When she entered Jonathan's office for her orientation, she found him standing by the window, city lights glittering behind him. Miss Thompson, he said warmly. Welcome to the team. She smiled shyly. Thank you, sir. I'm honored to be here. Jonathan gestured for her to sit. I've been reviewing your work. You have precision, consistency, and humility. 3 qualities most people lose the higher they climb. She blinked. I just try to do my best. He smiled faintly. That's exactly why I chose you. As they spoke, Jonathan found himself studying her more closely, not out of attraction, but admiration. Her eyes carried the kind of strength born from struggle, her voice the quiet steadiness of someone who'd walked through storms and learned to stand tall. When their meeting ended, she thanked him again and left. Jonathan stood at the window long after she was gone, watching her disappear into the corridor. Something about her presence lingered, like light after dusk. That night, he opened his journal, a leather-bound relic from his late father, and wrote only one sentence. Today, integrity reminded me that wealth means nothing without conscience. Then, closing the book, he whispered to himself, and maybe, just maybe, she's the lesson I was meant to learn. That evening, Grace sat alone on the subway home, the city lights flickering past the window. She thought about how strange life had been lately, how a small act of honesty had somehow led her here. Her phone buzzed. It was her father. "Hey, Pumpkin," his voice rasped. "Guess what?" "What's that, Dad?" "I'm getting discharged next week. Doctor says I can continue treatment from home." Grace's eyes welled up. "That's amazing, Dad. I can't believe it." "Believe it, sweetheart. Maybe all those prayers we said finally reached heaven." She smiled through her tears. "They always do, Dad. They always do." Back in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Jonathan stood by the window, unable to sleep. For the first time in years, the city didn't feel lonely. He poured himself a glass of whiskey but barely touched it. His thoughts were elsewhere, replaying Grace's words, her composure, the gratitude in her voice. He opened his laptop and found himself looking at her employee profile again. 28, he murmured. Single. 5 years in accounting. Clean record. He smiled faintly, then frowned. "What are you doing, Jonathan?" He wasn't supposed to feel anything. This started as a test, a moral experiment, nothing more. But the more he watched her, the more he realized something profound. She reminded him of the person he once was, before money, before betrayal, before cynicism hardened his soul. He closed the laptop and whispered into the night. Maybe she's not the one being tested anymore. Maybe I am. The following week, during a lunch break, Grace sat with a small group of colleagues from the division. They chatted casually, laughing between bites of salad. Then one of them, a woman named Tiffany, leaned in with a smirk. "You must have done something right to catch Mr. Locke's eye. Word is, he barely speaks to anyone outside the board." Grace's fork froze mid-air. "What? No, that's not." "Oh, come on," Tiffany interrupted playfully. "You're practically his shadow these days. If I didn't know better, I'd say he's grooming you for something big." Grace flushed. "It's not like that. He's just been kind. That's all." The others exchanged knowing glances, their laughter teasing but sharp. Grace tried to brush it off, but the whispers followed her down the hallways for days. Jonathan noticed the shift, the way she avoided his gaze in meetings, the way her shoulders stiffened when he walked by. Finally, he called her into his office. "Grace," he said gently, "is something wrong?" She hesitated. "No, sir." He frowned. "You're not very good at lying." She sighed softly. "It's nothing serious. Just people talking." "About what?" "About us," she said quietly. Jonathan's expression darkened. "Us. They think there's something inappropriate going on," she said, her face burning. "I know it's ridiculous, but—" Jonathan stood, pacing to the window. "I see." After a long pause, he turned to her. "Do you want me to distance myself? Stop involving you in my projects?" Her eyes widened. "No, please don't. I've learned so much. I just don't want to cause trouble." He smiled softly. "Then let them talk. Integrity speaks louder than rumors." Her lips curved faintly. "I suppose it does." Jonathan's tone softened. "You've proven who you are, Grace. Don't let gossip make you doubt that." She nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest, a warmth that wasn't just respect, but something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. That night, as she walked out of the building, she whispered a quiet prayer. "Lord, I don't know why you've placed me here, but if this is where I'm meant to be, give me the strength to handle it with grace." And somewhere on the top floor, her billionaire boss stood by his window, whispering something eerily similar. "God, help me not to ruin something pure." Jonathan stood by the glass window of his office, his hands tucked into his pockets, his reflection blending into the glittering city lights of downtown Chicago. It was nearly 8 p.m., but the office floor below still buzzed faintly, the sound of fingers against keyboards, printers humming, and somewhere the coffee machine sputtering its last drops. He wasn't really looking at the city. His eyes were on Grace, seated 2 floors below in the operations wing. Through the glass partition, he could see her, alone, shoulders slightly hunched, the glow of her computer screen lighting up her tired face. It had been 2 days since he'd quietly placed that extra $500 into her paycheck. 2 days since she'd gone home, found the error, and battled herself over what to do. And that morning, when she walked into his office, envelope in hand, he thought he was ready for whatever would happen next. But he wasn't. Grace had waited until everyone else was gone before she knocked. Her knock was soft, the kind that carried hesitation. "Come in," Jonathan had said, his voice neutral but curious. She stepped inside, holding the envelope as though it burned her fingers. "Mr. Jonathan," she began quietly, her tone respectful, but there was a weight in her eyes, a sadness that seemed to come from somewhere deep within. "I think there's been a mistake," she said finally, holding the envelope toward him. He arched a brow. "A mistake?" "Yes, sir. My paycheck, it had more money than it should. I counted it twice to be sure." Jonathan leaned back, studying her. "And you're returning it?" "Yes." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was no hesitation. "I know $500 isn't a small amount. But if it isn't mine, I can't keep it." For a moment, silence filled the room. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. Jonathan felt something shift inside him, something that was hard to define. He reached out and took the envelope slowly, his fingers brushing hers. "Thank you, Grace. You did the right thing." She smiled faintly. "It wasn't easy," she whispered. "But my dad always said, integrity isn't about what you do when people are watching, but when they're not." Jonathan nodded slightly, his throat tightening. "Your father raised you well." "He tried," she said softly, "even when life didn't make it easy." She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, Jonathan's voice stopped her. "Grace." She turned, her eyes meeting his. "How's your father?" She hesitated. "Not good, sir. His heart condition's getting worse. The hospital said we might need surgery soon." Jonathan swallowed hard. "I'm sorry to hear that." She nodded, then smiled faintly. "It's all right. God has a plan." Then she left, quiet, graceful, carrying herself like a woman who had nothing, yet still carried the weight of dignity like a crown. Now, 2 days later, Jonathan still couldn't get her words out of his head. He'd been around people all his life. Employees, investors, clients, politicians. Everyone had a price. Everyone had an angle. But this woman, this fragile, tired employee who had every reason to keep the money, hadn't taken it. Ryan, his assistant, entered the office with his usual swagger. "Boss," he said, dropping a stack of reports on the desk. "Quarterly revenue's up by 11%. You might actually smile for once." Jonathan didn't respond. Ryan followed his gaze to the glass wall below. Ah, still watching her. Jonathan turned sharply. "Excuse me." Ryan grinned. "Come on, sir. Grace. The one you tested." You've been staring at her cubicle like it's a stock ticker. Jonathan frowned. "I wasn't staring." Ryan shrugged, chuckling. "Whatever you say, boss. But that woman's different. I'll give her that." Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Different how?" "She's the kind who prays in the break room before eating a granola bar," Ryan said with a smirk. "And when that printer jammed yesterday, instead of calling maintenance, she actually tried to fix it herself, and then apologized to the printer when it didn't work." "Who does that?" Jonathan's lips twitched. "Maybe someone who still believes the world listens when you speak kindly." Ryan stared at him. "Since when did you start sounding like a motivational poster?" Jonathan ignored him and walked toward the window again. The truth was, he didn't recognize himself lately. Something about Grace, her humility, her resilience, her quiet faith, had disarmed him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about numbers, profits, or reputation. He was thinking about people. And that scared him more than anything. Later that evening, the rain came down hard. The office had emptied out, except for Grace, who was still typing reports. The janitor had already left, and the night shift hadn't yet started. Jonathan was packing up when a sudden flash of lightning cut through the skyline, followed by a deafening crack. The building lights flickered once, twice, and went out. Within seconds, the emergency lights came on, dim, eerie, painting the hallways in silver blue. Jonathan sighed, loosening his tie. The storm had been forecast, but he hadn't expected it to hit so soon. He reached for his phone, then stopped when he heard something from the floor below. A faint sound. A soft cry. He frowned and followed the noise, descending the stairs slowly. When he reached the operations floor, he saw her. Grace, sitting at her desk, her hands covering her face. "Grace!" he called softly. She looked up, startled. "Oh, Mr. Jonathan. I'm sorry, I didn't realize anyone was still here." He stepped closer. "Are you okay?" She wiped her cheeks quickly. "Yes, sir. The system crashed, and I lost some of the work I'd been doing for tomorrow's report. I know it's not your problem. I just didn't expect today to end like this." Jonathan studied her for a moment. The dim light made her eyes shine, like glass under moonlight. There was so much strength in her, and yet, so much pain hidden beneath it. He took off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders without a word. She blinked in surprise. "Sir, you don't have to." "I know," he said quietly. "But it's cold. And you've done more than enough for today." For a moment, silence hung between them, the kind that wasn't awkward, but heavy with unspoken understanding. Then she looked at him, her voice soft. "Can I ask something?" "Of course. Why did you test me?" Jonathan froze. Her tone wasn't angry, just curious, like she'd known all along but waited for the right moment to ask. He hesitated, then exhaled. "Because I wanted to see something." "See what?" "If integrity still exists in this world," he said quietly. "If people like you still exist." Grace looked at him, long and hard, and then smiled faintly. "You didn't have to test me for that, sir. You just had to believe." Her words lingered long after she left that night. For Jonathan, they weren't just words, they were a mirror. Because beneath his tailored suits and commanding voice, he realized something he hadn't faced in years. He'd stopped believing. Not just in people, but in himself. The next morning, he called Ryan into his office. "Ryan," he said, sliding a file across the desk, "get in touch with Mercy Hospital's billing department. I want all of Grace's father's medical expenses cleared. Anonymous payment." Ryan blinked. "Wait, are you serious? That's gonna cost a fortune." Jonathan's gaze hardened. "So does losing good people." Ryan whistled low. "All right, boss. But you know she'll find out eventually." "I don't care," Jonathan said, leaning back. "If integrity deserves anything in this world, it's mercy." But what neither of them knew then, what neither could have imagined, was that this act of kindness would soon spiral into something much bigger. Because when Grace's father's surgery went through, and the hospital said someone anonymous had paid the entire bill, her search for the mysterious benefactor would lead to secrets Jonathan never meant to reveal. Secrets that would shake the foundation of both their lives. The next morning began like any other for Grace. Quiet, gray, and heavy with the kind of exhaustion that coffee couldn't cure. She sat by her father's hospital bed, her small hands wrapped around his frail fingers. His chest rose and fell weakly beneath the thin blanket, but there was a softness in his face now. Peace where pain had lived for weeks. The heart monitor beeped rhythmically beside him, a sound she'd learned to find comfort in. She smiled faintly and whispered, "You're going to be okay, Dad. The doctor said the surgery went better than expected." Her father's lips trembled into a weak smile. "You paid for it all?" Grace looked down, guilt washing over her like a tide. "No, Dad. Someone else did. The hospital said an anonymous donor cleared the entire bill." Her father blinked. "Anonymous?" "Yes." She nodded, staring out the window. "They wouldn't even tell me who." He coughed softly, squeezing her hand. "Then maybe, Grace, maybe it's God's way of showing you that doing the right thing always comes back around." Grace smiled, but her heart stirred uneasily. She wanted to believe that. She wanted to think the miracle had fallen from heaven itself. But something inside her, something quiet and stubborn, told her this wasn't random. Someone had been watching. Someone who knew. That afternoon, she returned to work. The office was alive again, buzzing with phones, printers, and the low murmur of voices trading updates about the upcoming corporate gala. But as Grace walked through the doors, everything felt different. People greeted her kindly, but she felt detached, as though she was watching life unfold through glass. When she reached her cubicle, there was a note waiting on her desk. No name. No signature. Just a clean white card with simple black letters. Integrity has a way of returning the favor. Grace froze, her heartbeat quickening. She looked around, but no one seemed to be watching. The message was short, but something about it sent chills down her spine. She tucked the card quietly into her drawer and tried to focus on work. But focus was impossible. Every time she typed a number or formatted a document, her thoughts drifted back to her father, to the mystery donor, to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the man who tested her wasn't as cold as everyone thought. Jonathan watched her from his office, though he pretended not to. When Ryan had confirmed the hospital bill was settled and the payment made, Jonathan had felt a strange satisfaction. Not joy exactly, more like relief. Like he had restored something small but important in the world. He'd given countless bonuses before, donated to charities, built foundations. But this was different. This wasn't about tax deductions or corporate image. It was about one honest girl who'd reminded him what honor still looked like. "Boss," Ryan said, interrupting his thoughts as he entered the office. "We've got a problem." Jonathan turned. "What now?" "Finance flagged a transfer from your personal account to Mercy Hospital. They want to verify if it's official or—" Jonathan raised a hand. "Tell them it's none of their business. And make sure that transaction is buried." Ryan sighed. "All right. But if Grace finds out—" "She won't," Jonathan said sharply, then softened. "At least not from me." Ryan smirked. "You sure you don't want her to know?" Jonathan shot him a look. "I'm sure." Ryan shrugged and left, muttering something under his breath about mysterious bosses with savior complexes. But deep down, Jonathan did want her to know. He wanted to see her smile again. Not the polite kind she gave everyone at work, but the genuine, heart-deep kind that had broken through his walls the first day he noticed her crying. He hadn't realized how much he needed that smile, until now. 3 days later, the company's annual charity gala arrived. The ballroom at the Grand Haven Hotel was lit with gold chandeliers and soft piano music. Waiters glided across the marble floor, and guests in sleek suits and glittering gowns exchanged smiles over champagne flutes. Jonathan stood near the center, his posture composed but his mind elsewhere. He'd given a speech earlier about corporate responsibility, yet his heart wasn't in it. All he could think about was whether Grace had come. And then he saw her. She entered quietly, wearing a simple navy dress that somehow made the whole room dim in comparison. No jewelry, no fancy hair, just a calm gracefulness that drew eyes without trying. Ryan, spotting his boss's gaze, smirked. "There's your favorite employee." Jonathan ignored him. "Has she been assigned to any specific department tonight?" "Yeah," Ryan said, glancing at the staff list. "Volunteer desk near the donations box. Figures." Jonathan's lips twitched slightly. "Of course." He made his way through the crowd, greeting a few investors absently until he reached her table. She didn't see him at first. She was busy helping a couple sign their donation forms. When she finally looked up, surprise flickered across her face. "Mr. Jonathan," she said softly, straightening. "I didn't expect you to be here so early." "I could say the same," he replied. "You clean up well." She smiled faintly. "Thank you, sir." He paused, glancing at the donation box beside her. "So, how's your father?" Her eyes softened. "He's recovering. The surgery was successful." "That's good news," he said quietly. "You must be relieved." "I am," she said, then hesitated. "Though, I'm still trying to figure out who paid for it." Jonathan's expression didn't change, but his chest tightened. "You think it's someone from the company?" "I don't know," she admitted. But whoever it is, they saved his life. I just wish I could thank them." Jonathan looked at her for a long moment, fighting the urge to tell her everything right there. But something inside him stopped him. This wasn't about gratitude. It was about grace. If she knew, it would feel like debt, and he didn't want that. He wanted her to keep her dignity, her peace. So he only said, "Maybe you already have without realizing it." She frowned slightly, puzzled. But before she could ask, another employee called her over, and she excused herself. Jonathan watched her go, his heart a tangle of admiration and guilt. Later that night, as guests began to leave, Grace found herself alone near the stage. The donation box had been emptied, and the lights were dimming. She was about to gather her things when she noticed an envelope left behind on the table. No name. Just her initials written in neat handwriting. GL. She frowned, glancing around. The room was nearly empty. Curiosity got the better of her. She opened it, and froze. Inside was a short letter. "You returned what wasn't yours, and the world returned what you needed most. A believer in your integrity." Beneath the note was a small photo, one of her and her father smiling from a recent hospital visit. It had been taken by a nurse. But she hadn't given that photo to anyone. Her hands trembled as she stared at the signature line. It wasn't signed Jonathan, but the handwriting, the ink, the sharp edges of the letters, it looked exactly like his. Her heart skipped. It was him. The next day, she went to work with her mind spinning. Every time she saw him walking through the halls, she wanted to ask. But how could she? How could she confront her boss with something like this? Finally, during lunch break, she gathered her courage and knocked on his office door. He looked up from his laptop. "Grace, come in." She stepped forward slowly, clutching the envelope. "Sir, I found this after the gala." He glanced at it briefly, then back at her. "What about it?" "I think it's from you." He leaned back, expression unreadable. "Why would you think that?" Her voice softened. "Because it sounds like you. Because you're the only person who knew about the test. And because the hospital wouldn't tell me who paid the bill." Silence filled the room. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment, then exhaled. "Yes. It was me." Grace's eyes glistened. "Why? You didn't have to do that." "I didn't do it because I had to," he said quietly. "I did it because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten a long time ago." She frowned. "What's that?" "That goodness still exists," he said softly. "And that not everything in this world needs to be earned to be deserved." Her eyes filled with tears, and she covered her mouth. "Mr. Jonathan." He shook his head gently. "You don't owe me anything, Grace. Just keep being who you are." But even as he said those words, something between them had changed. Something quiet but powerful. Because from that day forward, the line between boss and employee began to blur. Not with romance yet, but with something far more dangerous. Trust. And trust, as both of them would soon learn, can heal hearts. Or destroy lives. The news spread through the office like wildfire. Soft at first, carried by whispers and glances, then louder, bolder, almost gleeful. Grace didn't know how it started. Maybe it was the nurse from Mercy Hospital who mentioned the anonymous payment. Maybe it was the charity gala where someone saw the envelope in her hands. Or maybe it was Ryan. By Wednesday morning, the whispers had turned into rumors. "She's got the boss wrapped around her little finger." Of course she does. She's the one who cried in the cafeteria that night. "I heard he paid her father's hospital bills. With his own money." Grace tried to ignore them, keeping her head down as she passed through the corridors, clutching her folders tightly to her chest. But silence was a luxury she no longer had. Jonathan's morning began with an uneasy call from HR. "Sir, there have been concerns raised," said Patricia, the department head. "People are talking about favoritism. That maybe Ms. Grace Lewis received." He cut her off sharply. "Stop right there. Whatever anyone's saying, I don't entertain gossip in this company." Patricia hesitated. "Understood, sir. But perception matters, and people are questioning your." I said that's enough, he snapped, his voice colder than the glass walls surrounding him. She murmured an apology and hung up, leaving Jonathan staring out his office window, jaw clenched. He had expected gratitude, maybe confusion, but not this. Not the bitterness, not the whispering that tainted something pure. Downstairs, Grace sat in the break room, staring at her untouched coffee. The voices behind her didn't bother lowering. Come on, she's not even in upper management. Why would he care? Because she's young, sweet, and knows how to act innocent. A chair scraped, and Grace rose slowly, turning toward them. I know what you're saying, she said quietly. Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't. And it's not true. The two women blinked, caught off guard. Grace continued, You can believe what you want, but integrity doesn't come with proof, it comes with peace. And I have that. Then she walked away, leaving them speechless. But the damage was done. The moment she stepped out of the room, she could feel the weight of their stares on her back like invisible hands pushing her down. That afternoon, Jonathan called her in. When she entered, she could tell something was wrong. The blinds were half drawn, his tie loosened, and there was an exhaustion in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Close the door, Grace. She did. He looked at her for a moment before speaking. You've heard the rumors, haven't you? She nodded, her throat tight. Yes, sir. His jaw flexed. I'm sorry this is happening. I didn't mean for my actions to bring you any trouble. You were kind, she said softly. Kindness shouldn't need to be explained. He gave a faint, humorless smile. In the corporate world, kindness without reason is considered suspicious. Grace hesitated. If you want to make this right, I can tell HR the truth, that I had no idea about the payment, that you did it on your own. He shook his head. That'll only make things worse. The more you explain, the guiltier they'll assume you are. So what do we do? Jonathan exhaled slowly, his voice dropping. We keep working. We stay professional. And we let time do the talking. She nodded, but deep down she wasn't sure time was on her side. For the next few days, she threw herself into work harder than ever. She arrived early, left late, skipped lunch breaks. If she couldn't silence their words, she could at least outwork their doubt. Jonathan noticed. He watched her through the glass walls, the way her fingers flew across the keyboard, the way her face stayed calm even when her eyes looked tired. Every once in a while she'd glance up, catch his gaze, and quickly look away. There was tension now, quiet, unspoken, but real. Not romantic, not yet, but something deeper. The mutual ache of being misunderstood. On Friday, an unexpected visitor arrived. Grace was sorting files when Ryan appeared beside her, holding a folder. The boss wants you in the conference room. Her stomach tightened. Now. She followed him, feeling dozens of eyes track her steps. When she entered, she froze. There were 4 people already there. Jonathan, HR's Patricia, the finance director, and a woman from compliance. Her pulse raced. Jonathan motioned for her to sit. Grace, I want to clear the air once and for all. HR has been investigating claims that you may have received financial assistance from me in exchange for favoritism. Her eyes widened. What? That's not. He held up a hand. I know it's not. But we're going to make it official. He turned to Patricia. Proceed. Patricia opened a folder. Ms. Lewis, we've reviewed your employment record, your recent paycheck, and your communication with Mr. Jonathan. We found no direct transactions between your account and his. However, a personal donation from his account was made to Mercy Hospital, which coincides with your father's surgery date. Grace swallowed hard. Yes, but I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know until afterward. Jonathan's voice was calm but firm. And she didn't benefit from any professional favors. Her record speaks for itself. She's one of our most diligent employees. Patricia hesitated. Sir, while that may be true, the optics. Jonathan cut in sharply. I don't care about optics. I care about facts. There was silence. Then he stood. Meeting adjourned. As the others left, Grace lingered, her heart pounding. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. "Because I won't let anyone drag your name through the mud for something you didn't do." Her eyes glistened. "They'll start saying worse now." "I don't care." "But I do," she said quietly. "I worked hard to earn this job, to be respected. I don't want people thinking I got here because you." Jonathan stepped closer, his voice gentler now. "Grace, you got here because you deserve to be here. I just happened to notice." Something in his tone made her breath catch. For a long moment they stood there, boss and employee, yet something more. Not in words, not in action, but in understanding. He cleared his throat, stepping back. "Take the rest of the day off. You've earned it." She nodded, but as she turned to leave, she said softly, "You shouldn't have to protect me, Mr. Jonathan." He watched her go. "Maybe not," he murmured. "But sometimes protecting someone feels less like a choice, and more like something you were meant to do." The next morning, the company's internal bulletin released a small statement. After internal review, no breach of conduct was found between Mr. Jonathan Hale and Ms. Grace Lewis. The company remains committed to integrity and transparency. It was brief, professional, but it was enough. The whispers quieted. Not gone, but muted. Grace returned to work, greeted this time with polite silence instead of suspicion. And Jonathan? He found himself staring at her name on the department roster, realizing that somewhere along the line, she had become more than an employee to him. She was a reminder, a mirror, and maybe, if fate allowed, a second chance at the kind of goodness he thought the world had forgotten. Chapter 7. That night, sleep did not come easily to Jonathan. The city outside his window was wrapped in fog, its usual hum reduced to a whisper. He sat by the window of his penthouse, staring out over the skyline, one hand wrapped around a glass of untouched whiskey. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, a man who had everything yet couldn't seem to rest easy. He kept replaying Grace's words from the elevator in his mind. "Integrity isn't about passing your boss's test, Mr. Jonathan. It's about passing your own." He hadn't expected her to see through him like that. Not with so much quiet grace, not with so much truth. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he thought of his father. The man who had taught him that emotions were weaknesses, that trust was a liability, that generosity should always be strategic. His father had built an empire on efficiency and control. Jonathan had inherited that empire, and the emotional isolation that came with it. But Grace, she was undoing everything he thought he knew about people, about strength, about honesty. He sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. There was something about her that went beyond the professional, something that reached into the quiet places he had buried long ago. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something dangerously close to admiration and longing. Meanwhile, Grace sat at her small kitchen table, the envelope with the extra money still lying unopened in front of her. It was nearly midnight. The hum of her refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Her father's hospital bill lay beside her, a reminder of how close they were to losing everything. She had already sold her late mother's jewelry, cut back on every luxury, and taken extra shifts at a diner just to stay afloat. She stared at the envelope. She could use that money to cover her father's treatment for another week. It would save his life, temporarily at least. But deep down, something held her back. She remembered how Mr. Jonathan had looked at her when he handed it to her. There had been something deliberate in his tone, something almost testing. She frowned. She wasn't stupid. She'd worked long enough to recognize when someone was observing her reactions. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, words spoken years ago when Grace was just a child. "Baby, never trade your soul for survival. God has a way of turning the honest heart into a miracle." Grace exhaled shakily. She folded her hands and prayed, "Lord, if this is a test, give me the strength to pass it. And if it's a blessing, give me the wisdom to see it clearly." After a long silence, she opened her eyes and made her choice. She tucked the envelope into her purse, resolved to return it the next morning, no matter how badly she needed it. The next day, Jonathan arrived at the office earlier than usual. He sat in his glass-walled office overlooking the city, waiting. Ryan, his assistant, walked in with a cup of black coffee. "Morning, boss. You're in early." Jonathan nodded. "I couldn't sleep." Ryan smirked. "Still thinking about the integrity test?" Jonathan didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the elevator. At exactly 8:03 a.m., Grace walked in, her shoulders squared, her face calm but determined. She approached his office slowly, holding the envelope in her hand. Ryan raised a brow. "No way. She's actually returning it." Jonathan didn't reply. He just gestured for Ryan to step outside. Grace stood before him, her heart pounding. "Good morning, Mr. Jonathan," she said quietly. He set down his pen. "Morning, Grace. What brings you here this early?" She took a deep breath. I think there's been a mistake with my paycheck." He leaned back slightly. "A mistake?" "Yes, sir." She held out the envelope. There was $500 extra in it. Jonathan studied her face, the tremor in her hand, the honesty in her eyes, the humility in her voice. He didn't speak for several seconds. Then he asked softly, "You're sure you want to return it?" "Yes, sir. It doesn't belong to me." Her voice cracked slightly. "My father's hospital bills are high, but I can't take what isn't mine. I've made peace with that." Jonathan's throat tightened. There it was, integrity, raw and unpolished, standing before him in its purest form. He took the envelope slowly from her hand. "Grace," he said quietly, "thank you." She smiled faintly, not understanding why his voice sounded so warm. "Of course, sir." But before she could leave, he added, "Wait." She turned around. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, an authorization form on company letterhead. "I'm transferring $20,000 to a hospital under your father's name," he said simply. "That's not from the company. It's from me. Consider it my personal appreciation for your honesty." Grace froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "Sir, I can't." "You already did," he interrupted gently. "You earned it." Her eyes welled with tears. "Why would you do this for me?" He smiled faintly. "Because last night, I realized I've spent years testing people to see if they were worthy of my trust. But you reminded me that sometimes, it's the people you least expect who teach you the real meaning of worth." There was silence between them. Deep, fragile and human. Grace wiped her eyes quickly and nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Jonathan. You have no idea what this means." He looked at her for a long moment and said quietly, "Maybe I do." That afternoon, the office buzzed with quiet whispers. Everyone had heard that the boss had personally paid for an employee's medical bills, something unheard of in Jonathan Reed's company. Ryan caught up with him in the hallway, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're a softie now, huh?" Jonathan chuckled. "Maybe I'm just finally human." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "You know, Grace changed something in you, boss." Jonathan paused. "Yeah, she did." As he looked across the open workspace at Grace, laughing softly with a coworker, her eyes alive with hope, he realized something simple yet profound. Integrity wasn't just about telling the truth. It was about choosing light, even when the world offered shadows. And in Grace's light, he found his own redemption beginning to take root. That evening, Grace visited her father at the hospital. He was awake, frail but smiling when he saw her. She sat by his bedside, holding his hand. "Dad," she whispered, "you're going to be okay. The bills are paid." Her father's eyes widened. "How?" She smiled softly. "A miracle, wrapped in kindness." Her father chuckled weakly. "You did the right thing, didn't you?" Grace nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I did." He squeezed her hand. "Then God sent you your answer." Grace smiled through her tears, whispering, "He did, Dad. He really did." That night, as Jonathan stood again by his window, the fog had lifted. The city below shimmered with light. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. And somewhere deep within that peace was the quiet image of a woman who had reminded him what it meant to be human again. The days that followed changed everything. Jonathan's once sterile office, where silence had been the default sound, now carried a sense of quiet life. The employees greeted him differently. They smiled more. Some even dared to make small talk with the famously cold CEO. And at the center of this subtle transformation was Grace. She didn't know it, but every decision Jonathan made now seemed to orbit around her presence. The way she worked with steady focus, the kindness she offered to colleagues who struggled, the way she made even the harsh fluorescent lights feel softer. He'd built his empire on efficiency, but she was teaching him something far more valuable: human warmth. One morning, as Jonathan stepped out of his car, Ryan caught up to him in the parking lot, holding a file and a mischievous grin. "Morning, boss. You're going to want to see this." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Ryan handed him a glossy magazine. On the front cover was a photo of him and Grace taken at the hospital charity gala last weekend. The headline screamed, "From boardroom to heartstrings? Billionaire Jonathan Reed spotted with mystery woman at Children's Hospital fundraiser." Jonathan blinked, scanning the image. Grace had been helping at the event, organizing donations. She looked radiant, smiling shyly beside him as he handed over a massive check. Ryan grinned. "You two sure made a headline. The PR team says it's great for the company's image. You're practically trending as the CEO with a heart." Jonathan sighed. "They always find a way to twist things." "You're not denying it though," Ryan teased. Jonathan gave him a sideways look. "There's nothing to deny." But even as he said it, his chest felt tight. Because lately, the line between admiration and affection was beginning to blur. Grace, meanwhile, was blissfully unaware of the headlines until a coworker rushed up to her desk that morning. "Grace, you're famous." The young woman squealed, waving her phone. Grace frowned, taking the phone. When she saw the photo, her heart skipped a beat. "Oh no," she murmured. This looks like something it's not." The coworker giggled. "You and the boss look good together though. He's handsome, rich, and now apparently charitable. Sounds like a dream match." Grace blushed furiously. "It's nothing like that. He was just being kind." But all morning, whispers trailed her wherever she went. Some coworkers smiled approvingly. Others cast jealous or suspicious looks. By lunchtime, Grace couldn't take it anymore. She took her meal outside and sat by the courtyard fountain, trying to breathe. That's when Jonathan appeared. He approached quietly, hands in his pockets, looking far less intimidating than usual. "Mind if I sit?" She glanced up and hesitated. Of course not. He sat beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them carried unspoken things neither was ready to name. Finally, Grace broke the silence. "I saw the magazine cover." Jonathan sighed. "Yeah, the press never misses a chance to invent a story." "I'm sorry if it caused any issues," she said softly. "I didn't mean for people to think." "That you mean something to me," he interrupted, his tone calm but weighted. Grace blinked. "I what?" He met her eyes, steady and sincere. "You do mean something to me, Grace. I just haven't figured out what to call it yet." Her pulse quickened. She looked away. "Mr. Jonathan, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," he replied. "Just know that your honesty did more than pass a test. It changed me." Grace stared at the rippling water in the fountain. Her emotions tangled between gratitude and confusion. "Mr. Jonathan," she said quietly, "you don't owe me anything." "I know," he said softly. "That's why I'm saying it." The following month arrived with a strange mix of peace and storm. Jonathan's company, Reed Enterprises, had never been stronger. Profits were rising, the new Employee Integrity Initiative was being praised nationwide, and for the first time, journalists were calling him the CEO with a conscience. But success, he knew, always attracted shadows. And one of those shadows was already watching him closely: his board of directors. It started subtly. Cold glances in meetings. whispered conversations when he entered the room, documents on his desk that suddenly went missing. Jonathan knew why. The board didn't care for his new reforms. They thought compassion was weakness. His father's old friend, Mr. Turner, the senior board member, was especially vocal. One afternoon, Turner walked into his office without knocking, his gold cufflinks gleaming, his tone cutting. "Jonathan," he said, "I've been reviewing your new charity expenditures. You've poured nearly $2 million into employee aid programs and personal hospital funds. That's not business, it's sentimentality." Jonathan didn't look up from his laptop. "It's also loyalty, Turner. My people work better when they know they're valued." Turner scoffed. "Valued? Or spoiled? This is a corporation, not a church." Jonathan closed his laptop slowly and met his gaze. "Maybe it's time we learned to be both." Turner's eyes hardened. "Be careful, son. Empathy doesn't keep shareholders happy." He turned to leave, then paused. "And that woman? Grace, isn't it? Keep your distance. The media's already spinning stories. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment." When the door shut, Jonathan's jaw tightened. He hated how Turner said her name, like it was something to be ashamed of. That evening, Jonathan called an emergency meeting with the finance department after discovering something odd in the reports. Several expense accounts had been tampered with. Funds from the new employee aid program had been rerouted into anonymous accounts. Someone inside the company was stealing. He ordered an internal audit immediately, but the results came back with an even bigger shock. The transactions were traced to Grace's access credentials. Jonathan froze, reading the report twice. His chest went cold. It made no sense. Grace would never. Ryan entered the office moments later, looking grim. "Boss, we just got confirmation from IT. The funds were transferred under her login. $500,000. Jonathan slammed the report shut. "That's impossible." Ryan hesitated. "I know what you're thinking. But if this goes to the board before we figure it out, they'll crucify her, and maybe you too." Jonathan stood, his voice low and firm. "I'll handle it." The next morning, Grace walked into work, cheerful and unsuspecting, until she saw the security guards waiting at her desk. "Miss Grace," one of them said stiffly, "Mr. Reed wants to see you." Now. Her heart dropped. Inside the office, she found Jonathan standing by the window, his face unreadable. "Sit down," he said quietly. She obeyed, her palms sweating. After a long silence, he turned to her. "Grace, someone used your access code to transfer company funds. A large sum." Her eyes widened. "What? That's not possible." "I know," he said softly, "but the system shows your credentials." Grace's voice shook. "Mr. Jonathan, I swear I didn't." He raised a hand gently. "I believe you." That stopped her. She blinked, tears threatening to fall. "You believe me?" He nodded. "I've seen your heart, Grace. You wouldn't take what isn't yours. But we have to prove it." She exhaled shakily. "What can I do?" "Leave this to me," he said. "And Grace, whatever happens, don't lose faith in what's true." Later that night, Jonathan stayed in the office alone, combing through data logs. He refused to let her name be destroyed. Hours passed. Coffee cups piled up. His eyes burned. Finally, at 2:47 a.m., he found it. An access trail that didn't belong to Grace's workstation. Someone had cloned her login credentials using a proxy server. The real culprit? Turner's assistant, Mr. Blake. Jonathan's pulse quickened. Blake was Turner's right hand, the same man who had once accused Grace of distracting the boss. It all fit. The fake transfers, the sudden board tension, the concerned whispers about favoritism. It was all a setup. He printed the evidence and leaned back in his chair, exhausted but burning with purpose. The next morning, the boardroom was filled with tension thick enough to cut through. Turner sat at the head of the table, smug and expectant. "Jonathan," he said coldly, "we've received serious reports about embezzlement tied to your employee, Miss Grace. It's an unfortunate situation, but the board agrees she should be terminated immediately. Jonathan placed a folder on the table and said evenly, "Then you should probably see this first." He opened the file, revealing system logs, timestamps, and an IT affidavit verifying the real hacker's identity. Turner's smirk faltered. Jonathan's voice remained calm, but every word struck like a hammer. The real thief is Mr. Blake. He cloned an employee's credentials, rerouted funds, and tried to frame her. I already contacted the FBI's cyber division. They confirmed the breach came from within your department. Gasps rippled around the table. Blake's face turned pale. Turner stood enraged. "You have no right to." Jonathan cut him off sharply. "This company will not run on fear and deceit anymore. You taught me to value profit over people, Turner. But you were wrong. Integrity is the real currency here, and I intend to protect it." There was silence. Then, slowly, the other board members began to nod. Jonathan turned to security. "Escort Mr. Blake out of the building." As the guards led Blake away, Jonathan looked at Turner one last time. "You can either adapt or you can step down. The choice is yours." Turner said nothing. He just glared, defeated. That evening, Grace walked into the office, trembling. "Mr. Jonathan, I heard there was a meeting. Am I?" He smiled gently. "You're safe, Grace. It's over." She blinked. "You proved it." He nodded. "It wasn't you. It was someone trying to destroy what we've built here." Her eyes filled with tears of relief. "I don't know how to thank you." He stepped closer, his voice soft. "You already did, the moment you refused to lose yourself when it would have been easier." There was a pause. Then, as if drawn by something beyond logic or timing, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "Grace," he said quietly, "you reminded me that wealth without conscience is poverty of the soul. You made me want to be a better man." She smiled through tears. "And you reminded me that goodness can exist in power." For a long moment they stood in silence, the city lights casting a gentle glow around them. Then Jonathan whispered, "Your father, how is he?" Grace's face lit up. "Recovering. The doctors say he's improving faster than expected." He smiled softly. "Good. He deserves that miracle." "So do you," she said. Months later, the company's culture had transformed completely. Jonathan and Grace continued to work together. Partners in purpose, grounded in mutual respect and quiet affection. One afternoon, as they stood by the office window, watching the sunset bleed across the skyline, Grace said quietly, "It's beautiful how light always finds its way through, no matter how dark it gets." Jonathan looked at her, smiling. Maybe that's what integrity really is, light that refuses to die, even when everything tries to smother it. And in that moment, both of them knew, this was not the end of a test. It was the beginning of a legacy born from one act of honesty. That changed 2 lives forever. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.